The security guard had my arm, and he was dragging me up the stadium steps toward the exit while 60,000 people watched, and my 7-year-old son was stumbling along behind us, sobbing, screaming, "Daddy, Daddy!" And I could not do a single thing about it, except keep telling him it was going to be okay when I did not know that it was. We had been thrown out. Publicly, roughly, humiliatingly, in front of an entire stadium, on the one day that was supposed to be the best day of my little boy's entire life. And I remember thinking, as that guard hauled me toward the tunnel, that I had failed him, that I had scraped and sacrificed for months to give my son this one bright thing, and it had ended in the worst way imaginable. What I did not know, what nobody in that stadium could have known, was that up on that field, something was about to happen that had never happened before, because the players were about to find out why we'd been thrown out. And when they did, the entire team was going to refuse to take the field. 60,000 people, a championship match, the whole world watching, and the players were going to stand there with their arms crossed and say they would not play another minute until my son and I were brought back with an apology. I'm going to tell you the whole story, who we are, why that day mattered so much, what really happened in those seats, and what the team did that stopped a championship in its tracks. But first, I want to tell you the thing this day taught me, and it is this. Sometimes the people you would least expect will risk everything to stand up for a stranger, and one act of decency, done loudly and publicly and without fear, can restore a broken man's faith in the entire world. Quick word before I begin, and then I'll let it unfold. I'm not a man who's used to being the center of anything, so I'll keep this short. If you've ever been humiliated in front of people and felt powerless to stop it, or if you've ever had someone stand up for you when you had no one, then this story is going to reach you, and I'd be honored to have you stay to the end. There's a subscribe button down there if it moves you. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Sean Callahan. I'm 38 years old, and I work with my hands for a living, honest work that doesn't pay much. And I'm a single father to my son Finn, who is 7 years old and the whole of my heart. I need to tell you how I came to be a single father, because it's the center of everything that happened that day. A little over a year before this story, I lost my wife. Finn lost his mother. Her name was Maggie, and she was the light of both our lives, and she got sick, and despite everything, we lost her. And in one terrible season, Finn went from being a little boy with a mom and a dad to a little boy with just a dad who was drowning in his own grief and trying, and mostly failing, to be enough for both of them. I don't talk much about that year because there aren't good words for it. I was trying to hold down my job and hold down my own grief and be a mother and a father both to a little boy who had gone quiet in a way that scared me. I learned to braid nothing, to cook the 3 meals Maggie used to make, to answer the questions a 7-year-old asks about where his mom went that no father should have to answer. I got a lot of it wrong. I'd catch myself snapping at him when I was really just exhausted and sad, and then I'd lie awake hating myself for it. We were 2 people who had lost the same person, grieving side by side, each of us trying to be strong for the other and both of us failing quietly in the dark. That was our life. That was the ground this whole story grew out of, and I need you to feel the weight of it, because it's the reason one soccer match mattered so much more than a soccer match ever should. Grief does strange things to a child. Finn didn't cry the way I expected. Instead, he went quiet and small, and he clung to the things that reminded him of his mom. And the biggest of those things was soccer, because Maggie had loved the game. She was the one who'd gotten Finn into it, the 2 of them watching matches together on the couch, her explaining the rules, both of them yelling at the television. And there was one team, our national team, and one player especially, a striker named Mateo Ruiz, the best player in the country, Finn's absolute hero that Maggie and Finn had loved, together. Watching that team was their thing, and after she was gone, it became the way Finn stayed close to her. He'd wear the jersey she bought him until it was falling apart. He knew every player, every statistic. When he watched a match, I could see him watching it with her somehow, keeping her alive in the only way a 7-year-old knows how. That jersey he wore was the whole thing, really. Maggie had bought it for him the last birthday she was well enough to celebrate. A little too big so he'd grow into it, the way parents do. And after she was gone, Finn wore it constantly, to the point where I had to sneak it into the wash while he slept, because he wouldn't take it off willingly. It was fraying at the collar. There was a small hole starting at the hem, and I never suggested we retire it or buy a new one because I understood what it was to him. It wasn't a jersey, it was his mother's arms, the last thing she'd wrapped him in. When he pulled it on, he was a little closer to her. So when I tell you my son walked into that stadium wearing that particular jersey, I need you to understand he was walking in wearing his mom, carrying her into the match she'd promised to bring him to. That's what was being dragged up the steps when the guard threw us out. Not just a boy, and the last soft thread connecting him to his mother. And there was a promise. Before Maggie got really sick back when we still thought she'd beat it, she had promised Finn that one day the three of us would go to a real match together. A big one, in person. It was going to be this whole dream, this thing they talked about constantly. And then she got sicker, and then she was gone, and that promise just hung there in the air of our house, unspoken, unkept, one more thing that cancer had taken. So when I found out that our national team had made it to a huge match in the Cup, right here, close enough that we could actually go, I decided I was going to keep Maggie's promise. Not the three of us, the way it was supposed to be. But I was going to take Finn to that match, and somehow his mom would be there too, in it, in the reason we were going. The trouble was money, because there is always the trouble of money for a man like me. Tickets to a match like that were far, far beyond anything I could afford. So I did what a father does. I took extra work, I sold some things, I skipped things. I saved every spare dollar for months, quietly, telling no one, until I had scraped together just barely enough for 2 tickets, the cheapest seats in the entire stadium, high up in a far corner, but 2 real tickets to a real match. I want you to understand what that saving actually looked like, because it matters to what those tickets meant. I picked up weekend shifts I was already too tired for. I sold a watch that had been my father's, and I didn't tell Finn, and I don't regret it. I ate a lot of cheap dinners after he was asleep so the grocery money would stretch. I told myself no to 100 small things over those months, and every dollar I didn't spend went into an envelope in a drawer, and I'd count it some nights just to see the number climb. It was slow, and it was hard, and there were weeks I thought I'd never get there, but I did, and I need you to understand that those weren't just tickets to me. They were months of a father's quiet sacrifice folded into 2 pieces of paper, every one of them spent gladly, because they were going to buy my grieving son one perfect day. I will never forget giving them to Finn. It was the first time since his mother died that I saw his whole face light up, the first real joy I'd seen in him in over a year. He slept with those tickets next to his bed. He crossed off the days on a calendar. For the first time in a long time, my grieving little boy had something to be happy about, and I had given it to him. And I felt for the first time since Maggie died like maybe I wasn't failing at this after all. And then we went to the match, and it all went wrong. Let me tell you exactly what happened, because the injustice of it still takes my breath away. We got to that enormous stadium, and Finn was beside himself with joy, wearing his mom's jersey, holding my hand so tight, taking in the noise and the color and the sheer overwhelming size of it. We found our seats way up high in the corner, and we didn't care that they were bad seats. We were there. We were actually there. I wish you could have seen him, walking in. He went silent, which for Finn meant he was overwhelmed in the best possible way, his head tipped all the way back to take in the sheer size of the place, the wall of noise, the ocean of color, the impossible green of the field far below. He kept squeezing my hand and looking up at me like he needed to confirm it was real, and I kept nodding, "Yeah, buddy, it's real. We're really here." For a whole year, I had watched grief make my son small, and in that stadium, for the first time, I watched something make him big again, watched wonder crack him open and pour light back into a face that had been shut for so long. Whatever else that day became, I got to see that. I got to see my boy amazed again. I would have paid 10 times what those tickets cost for just that one look on his face. And Finn was straining to see, this tiny boy trying to see his heroes down on that faraway field, and I could see how badly he wanted to be closer, just once, just to actually see the players as something more than distant specks. And so I did a foolish thing. A small, foolish, loving thing. During a break, I took Finn's hand, and I walked him down closer to the field, down toward the lower sections, toward the railing, just to give him a few minutes of seeing the players up close, of feeling like he was really there. We didn't belong in those lower sections. Our tickets were for the cheap seats. I knew that, but I thought, what's the harm, just for a minute, just to let my boy see his heroes, just to let him have this one thing. I only wanted to give Finn a closer look. That was my entire crime. And I keep coming back to how small it was, the thing that got us thrown out. I didn't sneak in without tickets. I didn't cause trouble, or drink, or fight, or say a crossword to anybody. I walked my grieving son 20 rows closer for a few minutes so he could see the men his dead mother had loved to watch, as something more than distant dots. In a fair world, the worst that happens there is somebody politely asks you to go back to your seats, and you say sorry and you go. That's all it ever should have been. Instead, it became a public disgrace, because the man who found me looked at how I was dressed and decided I was the kind of person you handle roughly, rather than the kind you speak to kindly. The size of the punishment had nothing to do with the size of the offense. It had to do with who he thought I was. That's the injustice in a sentence. And that's when the security guard found us. He was not gentle. He saw a man in cheap clothes, obviously not belonging in the good sections, holding a kid, standing where he wasn't supposed to be, and he made a decision about who I was. He grabbed me. Not, "Sir, you need to return to your seats." He grabbed my arm, hard, and started pulling me, and when I tried to explain, tried to say I just wanted my son to see, he wasn't listening, because he'd already decided I was some kind of troublemaker, some freeloader sneaking into seats I hadn't paid for, and I understood, in a sick flash, even as it was happening, exactly what he'd read in me. He'd seen the cheap clothes, the worn shoes, the fact that I plainly didn't belong down among the expensive seats, and he'd filed me instantly under a category, the kind of person who causes problems, the kind you handle firmly. He never once considered that I might be a grieving father who'd saved for months, who'd just wanted his motherless boy to see his heroes for 60 seconds. Why would he? People like me are invisible until we're inconvenient, and then we're suspects. That's the part that burned worse than his hand on my arm. Not that he was rough, but that he'd looked at me and decided who I was without a single question, and that the who he'd decided was a liar and a cheat, when all I was a dad. And the more I protested, the rougher he got, and other guards came, and before I fully understood what was happening, they were removing us from the stadium entirely. Not back to our seats. Out. Ejecting us completely. Throwing us out of the match we had every right to be at over a father walking his son a little too close to the field. I want you to picture it. My son, my grieving little boy, who had waited months for this day, who was wearing his dead mother's jersey, being dragged toward the exit sobbing his heart out, screaming for the day not to end, and me, helpless, humiliated in front of thousands of people, unable to protect him, unable to fix it, feeling every bit of the failure of a poor man who can't even give his kid one good day without it being taken away. Finn was hysterical. He kept saying, "But we didn't do anything, Daddy, we didn't do anything." And I had no answer, because we really hadn't. I had just wanted my son to see his heroes. That is the moment. That is where you found me at the start of this story, being hauled up those steps. But here is what I didn't know was happening, down on that field. In those same minutes. Somebody had seen us. In our section, and in the commotion, other people had seen the whole thing. Had seen a little boy in a worn jersey sobbing while his dad got manhandled out over nothing, and people had started to react. Some of them were filming. Some were shouting at the guards. And in the age we live in, that kind of thing travels fast, even inside a stadium. Word of what was happening, and a sense of how wrong it was, began to ripple outward and, crucially, downward, toward the field, toward the players' bench, toward the people warming up for the biggest match of their lives. And I want to give credit where it's due, because the players get remembered, but they weren't actually the first ones to stand up. The ordinary people around us were. Regular fans in those seats, people who'd paid good money for their own big day and could easily have just looked away, the way most of us do when someone else is getting handled by security, didn't look away. They saw a crying kid in a worn jersey and a dad being manhandled, and instead of minding their own business, they got angry on our behalf. They shouted at the guards. They pulled out their phones. Strangers I never got to thank made noise about an injustice that had nothing to do with them. And it was that noise, that refusal of ordinary people to shrug and look away, that carried our story down to the field in the first place. The players finished what those fans started, but the fans started it. And I've never forgotten that the whole thing began not with a hero, but with regular people in cheap seats deciding that what they were watching was wrong, and they would not be silent about it. That's a kind of courage, too, and a rarer one than people think. And it reached Mateo Ruiz, Finn's hero, the best player on the team. Somebody got word to him or showed him of what had just happened up in the stands. A kid thrown out, distraught, in a jersey, over nothing. And here is the thing I would only learn later. Mateo Ruiz was, himself, a father. And more than that, and this is the part that still undoes me, Mateo Ruiz had grown up poor. Dirt poor. He had been exactly the kind of kid who could never in a million years have afforded a ticket to a match like this, who'd grown up on the outside of stadiums like this one, dreaming. He looked at the story of a poor man and his boy being thrown out of the people's game, the game that was supposed to belong to everyone, and something in him refused to let it stand. I learned later that he talked about it afterward, about why he couldn't let it go. He said that when he heard a kid had been thrown out, he didn't see a stranger's problem. He saw himself, 30 years ago, a poor boy who used to press his face against the fences of stadiums he could never afford to enter, watching the rich file in, learning early exactly where he stood in the world. He said soccer had saved his life precisely because it was supposed to be the one thing that belonged to everyone, rich and poor alike, the people's game, the game of the streets and the dirt lots. And the idea that a poor father and his son had been thrown out of that game, humiliated, treated as though they didn't belong, it struck at something sacred to him, at the boy he used to be. He said he thought, if I don't stand up for that kid, then what was any of it for? What good is all this fame and money if I'll stand on this field and let them do to that boy exactly what the world did to me? And so he decided he wouldn't. And so, as the players were meant to be taking the field for the start of the match, Mateo Ruiz did not take the field. He stopped, and he told his teammates what had happened. And one by one, then, all at once, the entire national team, these famous, powerful athletes at the biggest moment of their careers, decided that they were not going to play. They refused to take the field. In front of 60,000 people and a global television audience, and the officials and the sponsors and all that money and all that pressure, the whole team simply stood there and would not begin the match and sent word to the officials that they would not play another minute until the father and son who had just been wrongfully thrown out were found, brought back, and given an apology. I've thought so much about the courage that actually took, and I don't think most people appreciate it, understand the pressure on those men in that moment. This was a cup match, one of the biggest of their entire lives. There were sponsors who had paid fortunes. There were officials and broadcasters and a global audience and rules and schedules, and an unimaginable machine of money and expectation all bearing down on them to just play the game. Refusing to take the field at a moment like that was not a small gesture. It was the kind of thing that could have brought real consequences down on them. Fines, penalties, the fury of powerful people who do not like being defied. And they did it anyway, all of them, for a man and a boy they had never met and would gain nothing from helping. That is what makes it mean something. It's easy to be decent when it costs you nothing. They chose to be decent when it might have cost them a great deal, at the highest pressure moment of their careers, in front of the whole world. They put a stranger's dignity above their own championship. I did not know men like that still existed. It turned out a whole team of them did. I knew none of this. I was outside by now, in a concrete corridor near the exit, kneeling in front of my sobbing son, trying to piece his broken heart back together, telling him I was so sorry that I'd find a way to make it up to him, knowing I couldn't. And then I became aware of commotion, of stadium officials, important-looking people hurrying toward us. And my first thought, my instinct as a poor man who'd just been in trouble, was that we were in even more trouble now, that they were coming to make sure we really left, maybe to threaten us. That is not what they were coming to do. They were, it turned out, frantically looking for us. Because up on that field, a championship match was frozen, would not start, and could not start until they found the man and the boy that their own security had thrown out. And when they reached us, their whole manner was different, apologetic, almost pleading. They told us, this bewildered, grieving father and his tear-streaked son, that the team had refused to play, that Mateo Ruiz himself had refused to play, until Finn and I were brought back. They asked us, if we would please come back inside. I could not process it. I remember just staring at them, holding Finn, not understanding the words. The team had stopped the match? For us? For me, a nobody, and my little boy? It didn't make any sense. Things like that did not happen to people like us. People like us got thrown out and forgotten. We did not get championships halted in our name. I want to try to explain what that disorientation felt like, because it's a specific thing that people who've been on the bottom will understand. When you've spent your life being the one who gets moved along, dismissed, handled, you develop a kind of reflex. Any attention from authority means trouble is coming. So when those officials came rushing at us, my whole body braced for a blow, because that is what a lifetime had taught me to expect, to have it be the opposite, to have powerful people rushing toward me not to punish me but to beg my forgiveness, to have the entire apparatus that had just crushed me suddenly, frantically trying to lift me back up. It broke something open in me that I didn't have a name for. It was like the floor of the world tilting the other way for once. I had braced so hard for more cruelty that the kindness nearly knocked me over. I actually asked them to repeat it, because my mind could not accept the words the first time. The team stopped the match. For you, please come back. But it was true, and so, in a daze, holding my son's hand, we let them lead us back inside, and they did not take us back to our seats in the far corner. They walked us down toward the field, the very thing I'd been thrown out for wanting, and as we emerged back into the view of that enormous crowd, something happened that I will remember until the day I die. The stadium roared. 60,000 people, who by now all knew the story, rose to their feet and roared for us, for a working man and his little boy. I have never felt anything like that sound, and I never will again. Understand, I had walked out of that stadium 20 minutes earlier as the lowest thing in it, a man being dragged out in disgrace while thousands watched, and I burned with shame. And now I was walking back into a roar, 60,000 strangers on their feet, for me, for Finn, the same crowd that had watched me be humiliated now thundering their welcome. The shame and the glory of it were almost too much to hold in one body. I felt Finn's hand tighten in mine, felt him stand up straighter, and I thought, remember this, son. Remember that the world knocked you down in front of everyone, and then the world stood up and roared you back. Both of those are true, and you get to choose which one you carry. I decided, in that walk down to the field, that we were going to carry the roar. And down on the field, the players were waiting. And Mateo Ruiz, Finn's hero, his mother's favorite, the best player in the whole country, walked over toward us as we came down to the edge of the field. I watched my son's face. I watched Finn look up and realize that Mateo Ruiz, the man he had watched with his mother 100 times, the last bright thread connecting him to her, was walking straight toward him. And I watched Mateo Ruiz kneel down in front of my 7-year-old, so they were eye to eye, and I watched him tell my boy how sorry he was for what had happened, and ask him his name, and talk to him, really talk to him, this little boy, like he was the most important person in that whole enormous stadium. Which, in that moment, he was. And Finn, through his tears, told Mateo Ruiz about his mom. He just came out with it, the way kids do. He told his hero that his mommy had loved him, loved watching him play, that she'd promised to bring him to a game, and that she had died, and that he was wearing her jersey. And I watched this famous athlete, this hero, absorb what my little boy was telling him, and I watched his own eyes fill with tears, and I watched him pull my son into a hug right there on the edge of the field while a whole nation watched. And then, Mateo Ruiz did something I will be grateful for as long as I live. He didn't just hug my son and move on. He took the time. He asked Finn to tell him about his mom, what she was like, what her name was, how she used to cheer. And he listened, really listened, to a 7-year-old describe the mother he'd lost in the middle of a stopped championship with 60,000 people waiting, as though nothing in the world was more important than hearing about Maggie. He told Finn that his mother sounded wonderful, and that she'd clearly raised a brave, good boy, and that he was going to play this match for her, for Finn's mom, and that Finn should watch, because every good thing he did out there tonight was for her. And I stood there and wept, openly, in front of everyone, because in that moment a stranger had reached into the worst wound my son carried, and, instead of avoiding it the way people do, had honored it. He'd made Finn's mother part of the day. He'd taken the thing that made Finn saddest and turned it into the reason the whole night meant something. I don't have the words for what that gave my boy. I've spent every day since trying to be even a fraction as kind to people as that man was to my son in those few minutes. I'm going to be honest with you about the rest, because I think the truth of it matters more than any fairy tale. They gave us seats for the rest of that match. Real seats, wonderful seats, close to the field, the seats Finn had dreamed of. The guard who had thrown us out was dealt with by the stadium, appropriately and through the proper channels, and I took no pleasure in that part. I didn't want anyone ruined. I just wanted it understood that what he'd done was wrong. I mean that, about taking no pleasure in it. A lot of people, when they hear this story, want the guard to be destroyed, want some big revenge, and I understand the feeling, but that was never what I wanted. He was probably a working man, too, doing a hard job for low pay, who made a bad snap judgment about the wrong person on the wrong day. That doesn't excuse it. What he did was wrong, and it needed to be named as wrong. But I didn't need him crushed to feel whole. I needed my son's dignity restored, and it was, magnificently. And once that was done, I had no appetite for anyone else's ruin. The lesson of that day was about lifting people up, not tearing them down, and it would have been a strange way to honor it by demanding somebody be destroyed. That was handled, and it isn't the part of the story I hold on to anyway. The match was played, finally, and I could barely tell you a thing about the game itself, because I spent the whole of it watching my son, who watched every minute of it lit up with a joy I had feared he might never feel again after his mother died. Something shifted in Finn that night that I don't think has ever shifted back, and I mean that in the best way. For a year, I had been watching my son carry a grief too heavy for such small shoulders, watching it press him down and shut him in. And that night, I watched a little of it lift. Not because the pain of losing his mom went away, that never fully goes away for either of us, but because he learned, at 7, in the most dramatic way imaginable, that the world could still be astonishingly good. That strangers could stand up for you. That his hero could see him, really see him, and honor his mother. A kid who has lost a parent can start to believe, quietly, that the world is a cruel place that takes things from you. Finn had been on his way to believing exactly that, and a whole team of men reached into that stadium and taught him something different. Something I'd been trying and failing to teach him for a year, that there is still enormous kindness out there, that people will surprise you, that being knocked down is not the end of the story. They gave my son back a little of his faith in the world. You cannot put a price on that. It was worth more than any seats, any signature, any perfect day. But the part I hold on to, the part that changed something in me, is what it meant that a whole team of powerful men stopped everything for a nobody. Because here is what I understood, sitting there, watching my boy. They didn't do it because we were special. We weren't. We were just a poor man and his kid. They did it because something was wrong, and they had the power to make it right, and they decided that a human being's dignity mattered more than a championship, more than money, more than all the enormous pressure on them to just take the field and play. They used the one thing they had, their power, their fame, their leverage at the biggest moment of their careers, to stand up for a stranger who had none. And they did it loudly and publicly and without hesitation. Now, I want to tell you the honest part, the part I always come to. Because I know that most of the time, this is not how it goes. Most of the time, when a working man gets humiliated and thrown out of somewhere by someone with more power, no team stops the game. No stadium roars for him. He just goes home carrying the shame of it, and no one ever makes it right. I know how extraordinarily rare what happened to us was. I don't want anyone to hear this and think that justice always comes riding in. It usually doesn't. But that is exactly why what those players did matters so much, and exactly why I'm telling you, because the rareness of it is a challenge, not a comfort. The lesson isn't wait and someone powerful will save you. The lesson is, when you are the one with the power, in whatever small way, when you see someone being treated wrongly and you could look away, don't. Be the one who stands up. Be the one who refuses to play until it's made right. You will almost never be a famous athlete stopping a championship. But every single one of us every day gets small chances to use whatever power we have to stand up for someone who has none. And most people look away, the players didn't. That's the whole thing. And here's the part I most want you to take with you, because it's the practical piece. Your version of refusing to play will almost never look like a stadium. It'll look like speaking up when you hear someone being talked about cruelly and everyone else is laughing. It'll look like being the one who says something when a person is being treated unfairly at a store, a workplace, a family table, when it would be so much easier to stay quiet and not make it your problem. It'll look like the thing those fans in the cheap seats did before any famous player got involved, just refusing to look away, refusing to shrug, using the small power of your own voice on behalf of someone who's outnumbered. That's the whole game, and every one of us plays it every day whether we notice or not. Most people, most of the time, look away, because looking away is easy and standing up is hard and might cost you something. Be the one who doesn't look away. You will never know how much it might mean to the person you stand up for. I know exactly how much it meant to me, because I was that person once, on the worst and then the best day of my life. There's one more thing, and then I'll let you go. That night, driving home, Finn was asleep in the back seat, exhausted and happy, still clutching his mother's jersey, which now had Mateo Ruiz's signature on it. And I looked at him in the mirror, this little boy who had been so broken by losing his mom, who I had watched suffer for a year, and who had just had the best day of his life, a day that started with the worst humiliation and ended with a whole stadium on its feet for him. And I thought about Maggie, about her promise. She'd promised to take him to a game, and she couldn't. And I'd been so afraid I'd let her down by letting the day get ruined. But I hadn't. Somehow, through the worst possible version of the day, her promise got kept better than any of us could have dreamed. Finn didn't just go to a match. He was embraced by his hero, cheered by a whole nation, made to feel, for one day, like the most important boy in the world. And I like to think that somewhere, somehow, Maggie saw it, and that she knew her boys were going to be okay. For a whole year, I had felt like I was failing her. Failing the woman who trusted me to take care of our son, watching him hurt and not knowing how to fix it, sure that she'd be disappointed in how badly I was managing without her. But that night, I let myself imagine her watching the whole thing, the ejection and the tears, and then the roar and the hug, and our boy's face lit up like the sun, and I let myself imagine that instead of disappointment, she felt proud. Proud that I'd kept saving for those tickets. Proud that I'd kept her promise the only way I could. Proud that our son was going to be okay, because he was surrounded, it turned out, by a world with more good in it than either of us had dared believe that terrible year. And driving through the dark with my son asleep and safe behind me, for the first time since I lost her, I believed it too.